We're live and hello family. Hello family. How are you? This is your Omiinka 7 Live coming at you by way of Omi's Production Studio and also through the Oracle Divination Network. And I'm coming to bring you a new segment. And I am away off on sabbatical. I'm here in the lovely city, Meadville, Pennsylvania. And boy, are the mountains all around us and the valleys. So I'm bringing this from the perspective of my hometown where I grew up at, and the lovely little town of Meadville, Pennsylvania. And I hope we have a quorum today because we're going to have to vote on some things and we're going to have to make some changes to our lives. So, as you know, I bring you perspective from the family, from the hero's perspective, home economics and related occupation, whatever pertains to the family, you know I am in there talking about it. So today I want to talk about we must form our new tribe. Because I go by Omi Inca 7 and the tribe, I believe in tribes and I know it's necessary that we must have tribes. And I want to say from the perspective of the tribe maker herself, I've always told you we needed a tribe. I've always invited you to be a part of establishing your own nations and tribes. Now, here's what's going on in the news. Right now, we have the Cherokee Nation in and out of court talking about their tribal ways and how, in fact, they have negated and disallowed African Americans to be a part of their tribe. Now, you know how we talked about that side of us that was half Native American and half black with the straight hair on one side and the kinky hair on the other. They finally decided to challenge us and let us know that we are definitely not a part of their tribe. And don't even try it. Don't even think you're going to come in because you say you're part Native American and get a piece of the pot. They're not having it. And you know what? If we were in that same predicament, we would say the same thing. Now, let me set you straight on a few things. Um, First of all, the Cherokee Nations, they were slave owners, and they owned some of our ancestors and our loved ones. And, you know, when they decided to eliminate slavery, it wasn't just the South that they had to contact, it was also the Native Americans, and the Cherokees were one of them. They owned and they sold slaves. So they were given reparations right along with those other white men in power who owned slaves. And the Cherokees did not want to sell their slaves, but because they sold them, they were compensated with reparation. Now, do you think they're going to want to turn around and add you into their tribe and make you like you were a brother or sister? You must remember, there was also those $5 Native Americans who bought their way into the tribe just to receive the benefits that the Native Americans were receiving. But what I want to focus in on today, please note this, people. What I want to focus in on today is the discussion where we are speaking of ourselves as aboriginals, indigenous aboriginals. A lot of people out there on the radio want us to give up the terminology original aboriginals and they want us to adapt DOS, descendants of slaves. Now, let me say this to you to set the record straight. It does us no good to use DOS just to perpetuate the actual court system or the DA to make them realize that we are the ones who were left back here by our ancestors. They know that. We don't have to perpetuate that. What they don't know is if they are not aware of the fact that we are indigenous and we can use that terminology And a number of us who are on these radio stations want us to drop the terminology original aboriginals. And they're saying that it doesn't help our case to prove that we're entitled to reparation. We don't need that particular exhibit to prove that we're slaves. There's enough evidence around here to prove that something did transpire with us, and there was a transitioning of our mind, and there was a mental collapsing into madness. And whether or not we served as slaves and we were part of that slave gang, we still suffered from some mentis and for some Holocaust, Middle Passage, Atlantic Passage condition. So I don't think the fight should be on the title of our name, because we have to carry ourselves with pride, irregardless of who we say we are. But we know beyond a shadow of a fact that when Christopher Columbus got here, he found the Indians and he found some of our ancestors who were black, occupying in industries and in positions and functioning as non-slaves. But yet our lives and their lives were tampered with by the status quo, Mr. Enforcer, who began to put free slaves back into slavery. Now let's get this straight. They began to put free slaves back into slavery who were not even slaves and who were outside of slavery. There were slave catchers out there who didn't care what you called yourself, whether a DOS or somebody that was out there as an independent contractor. If you shared the Nubian blackness on your skin, you could be put back into slavery, regardless of who you called yourself, a DOS or someone that never had ventured into slavery. You were being put back into slavery. So what am I saying? I'm saying that we're all owed a reparation because of the damages that we suffered. But let's not put any more madness onto ignorance by calling ourselves descendants of slaves. Come on now. When you speak those words to anyone, they want you to vanish. They don't want to be reminded of who you are because they don't want to accept the fact that they shared a part in this heresy of destroying our legacies. We must go on to create legacies for ourselves as the Nubian people. And don't even take up the word descendants of slaves. We are Nubian queens and kings who were occupying here on Turtle Island before they got here. And they put bags over our heads and drug us back to Africa too. And we were never a part of the slave trade, but they put us there because they could make a bundle of money off of us. We were commodities at that time. So if we want to say anything that we were commodities, and we were actually slave trafficked as if we were product that they were moving. Okay? But as far as all of us sharing into this saying we want to accept that we were descendants of slaves, some of us didn't have to be in order to be sold back into slavery. So you would also create a problem by using that term, because what if you ended up back into slavery and you never were in slavery from the beginning and you were a free child and you had your freedom? So now with them putting you back into slavery, would you say second time slaves? Would you say ditto slaves? Now you're into slavery. Now you're not. See me now. Don't see me when you see me. Or what are we going to do? Let's stop getting engulfed into terminology for the sake of someone saying that I coined it, I created it, I was the one that said descendant of slave. We are so ignorant that we're so desperate to get credit for terminology that we don't know the real picture. If you're going to get credit for something, get credit for something that you recreated. We're creating new tribes. Why don't you get with the New Jack City so we talk about the new tribes? Then we won't have to get confused in the discombobulation of whether or not you were free when you are over here on Turtle Island, or whether or not they drug you into slavery. So we're the New Jack tribes that we're talking about. So let's get with it. Is everybody ready to throw down and talk about the new Jack tribes? And when we create the new tribe, there won't be any confusion as to whether or not your mother was on the slave ship number 1, slave ship number 2, or the new Jesus transition slave ship. We were just a tribe, a quest of a tribe without a cause, or a rebel without a cause. So we're the new tribes. Now let's coin this today. So when we get out on the airways, we can say we're not talking about no descendants of slaves. We're talking about the new tribe. And the new tribe is the only thing that makes sense. Why tally in the past and dabble in the past when we can go on forward in the future talking about what we are now and what we are demanding benefits for now, because we're still hurting, we're still damaged, and we're still broken, and we need to understand something. We're here now, here on this Turtle Island, and this is where we have been, and this is where we be. And because this is where we be, we can substantiate that we are a tribe here on this island because we occupy and we're real. We can be touched and seen. So get over the DOS and stop talking about you are a descendant of slaves. You are here now, and you're no more descendant of slaves than a man in the moon, because your mothers and fathers were born here on this land, on North America, and they were free. And they were freedmen. If you want to call yourself anything, call yourself freedmen. So we got to come together on one thing. We continue to do damage to ourselves with our very own words. And then we whisper, let's don't have those other Negroes over there saying that that they're something else. Let's make them say that they're descendants of slaves because they're hurting our case. How are we hurting anybody's case when we can't even prove that we were coming from Africa? And on ships, we can't even find the documentation to substantiate it. Maybe there was slavery, but we know that we were here on this island occupying, and some of us were taken back to Africa by the Europeans and put in slavery. So we can't say we were descendants of slaves here. We have to say we were freedmen here, and they came and took us. But let's get one thing straight. The Native Americans are not our friend. I don't care how much you want to be an indigenous person after those, and they're not indigenous because they had gone into, hold on for a minute. Let me say hello to some people here. Hello, Wayne. Hello, Randall. Hello, Carlton. Hello, Laurice Clark. Hello, Bruce. Hello, Anthony. Hello, Derek. Hello, Vivian. Hello, Pastor Frank. And hello, Lancer. I brought that water here and I spilled the water on the floor. Hold on tight. Okay. And once again, earphones on here so I won't lose anybody. All right. And we're back. Sorry about that. Had to get some water up. I want to say that once again, we're broadcasting live here in Meadville, Pennsylvania. I am here on a bereavement, but nevertheless, I am here. I like to say that we have to get one thing straight. There's court cases going on right now with Native American, the Cherokee Nation or tribe, in and out of court, talking about their position and how they do not want African Americans in their nation. They're not our friends, people. And anytime they have to go to court to prove that we are not a part of their establishment, that means that they are not for us. We must develop our own tribes and our own nations. We know we're from somewhere, and we know that we're people of color. And we must also know that we suffered through a Mayafa, which is similar to the Jews suffering, the so-called Jews who are alluded to being Jews, who may very well be us, and they may very well be the people that suffered through a second Holocaust, if there ever was one. But we must remember, we cannot allow African American brothers and sisters to speak out of the other side of their mouth and to continue to damage our position on reparation, because we're getting closer and closer to the possibility of receiving our reparation, and we're getting in position so that we can demand our reparation. Let me say hello to Jonquel, Theodore, and who else is this down here? Lennis, hello. How are you? Thank you so much for joining this afternoon. And you've got your Omega 7 Live here and Tribe. And this is the real Tribe. And I've been the only one on the national radio station, which is online radio, who has proclaimed a tribe and told you the necessities of why it's important to form your own tribes. Don't let anyone fool you or Jew you down and jerk you out of your second time potential for reparation, because it's going to take formalized tribes who are ready with their referendums and with their traditions and with their established treaties and written up well, so that you can express yourself and explain why you as a tribe are entitled to reparation. It's not because you were descendants of slaves, it was because of the way you were treated for your blackness, your Nubian skin. And some of you didn't have to have fathers and mothers as a slave to be mistreated. It was because of the burnt skin you have on your faces and the Nubian blackness that you wear. It is a scar. And if anything, you are mistreated because of the scar you wear on your face. And many of you could have been here on Turtle Island functioning in your industries and working, but you were still mistreated when the so-called voyagers came with Christopher Columbus. They felt themselves to be a lot higher than you, and that you were the lesser person, and they tried to intimidate you by putting you into slavery and taking you away from Turtle Island. Now, does that mean that your mother and fathers were slaves? No, it doesn't. It means that they put you into slavemanship because they thought you were 3/5 of a person and that you were equated to cattle. Now, I want to say to the listening audience in the radio world that we are fighting too much with ourselves to gain notoriety about how close we're getting to establishing a petition for our reparation. The petition is already out there. It is an international petition where we now have international clearances, and they are looking at our case because they see that we were one of the groups or the tribes, no matter what we call ourselves, who were left out, who were not included in reparation. And I want you to know that the Cherokee received their reparation, and they also received it because they excluded you out as a black person, and they excluded it and made it official by going to court to say we don't want those Negroes in our organization, and they're not a part of our organization. So stop saying I got half Indian in me and I want to prove that I'm a native. You're already an indigenous aboriginal, and don't let anybody take that from you by telling you to drop that title and telling you you weren't here before the Indians. Yes, you were, because the Indians integrated with a lesser melanin people. That's why they ended up with the fair skin and the long, silky horse hair. The indigenous mean close to the ground, close to the environment, close to the environment where it would nap up your hair and darken your skin and broaden your nose and thicken your lips, because indigenous means indigenous of the actual environment, indigenous to your living quarters. So as your mothers and fathers lived off the land and were able to go in the forest and find their food, it made them indigenous. And any fool that was dark enough would know that they came from some indigenous environment. But you find these lighter skinned people who know that they came from European. They're the ones that are fighting this the most, saying that they're not indigenous. So what are you saying? What are you claiming? That you just showed up like a bug? Are you looking at the Big Bang Theory and you just showed up on this climate? No. Your mothers and fathers lived on this land. There wasn't a time that they didn't know when there weren't indigenous people here. We were always here. And you can locate our kind, not a kind, but our mankind up in high places. You can define yourself and you can locate your grandmothers up in high places. And they've already substantiated Lucy up in high places with her DNA of a black woman. So don't let anyone steal that from you and go off of the concept that you're descendants of slaves. That is not a nation. That is not a kind of people. You are the first humankind. You're not a kind of person, meaning that you don't have a soul. You are a person with a soul who didn't just migrate here. You were a part of this indigenous climate on Turtle Island. So let's get that straight, because I'm sick and tired of hearing these people on the radio station who's supposed to be our leaders misleading the people, telling them don't use indigenous properties or terminology and don't say that you were the first world people. Then who are we? If you know so much and your mothers were raped and you look part white, and you still say that we're not native to this land, then who are we? How do we get so black? And how do we get the features of an African if we were not a part of this land? And they could have brought us from Africa to come here and occupy, but we weren't brought over on ships to be enslaved. We were already here and possibly taken back to Europe. Now, do we have that straight? I'm broadcasting live from YouTube as well as from my Facebook channel. How are my Facebook friends doing? How are we doing as a group? And we're looking at formalizing new tribes. I've been talking to you about the Council of Elders and why that is needed first. I'm going to need people who would like to put themselves in the category of the elders of the council. And they're going to have to be ready to speak and to strike at any time. And then we're going to look for that category of the family that we must need to create the structure. The family that will create the structure will work on family issues, and they're all around us. And before we can do anything or receive any reparation, we must be structured and organized in a tribe. And it does not have to be the Cherokee or the T.R.I.B.E.S. It doesn't have to be any of those, but we must remember, let's not forget about the Geechee Gullah. They were a tribe. And if you wanted to assign yourself to any tribe here on Turtle Island, you could easily go over and take up membership with the Geechee Gullahs in South Carolina and formalize you a tribe there or connect with the tribe. But don't ever leave yourself out of the tribe by talking about you're a descendant of a slave. Come on now, the slaves weren't organized. They were not walking around putting and laying down seances, and they were not going around with their groups surging, assert themselves on their slave masters. They were in bondage, and they were not able to do anything for themselves except through the times when they rised up. There's no benefit in calling yourself a descendant of a slave, because they all look at that as if someone who was incapacitated and who had no ability to fight for themselves. It further weakens you. And if you want to prove that you are the new Jack on the block and that you have arrived, you better call yourself something other than the descendants of slaves. I suggest you give yourself a new name, somewhere in the name of a tribe and a quest for a tribe. But it's very important what you call yourself, because what you call yourself is what you're indicative to living out your life in. And we want to set it to rest that those radio broadcasters that are telling us and informing us, and those who can't think for themselves, who are followers, going around saying, I'm a descendant of a slave. I want my reparation because I'm a descendant. What do you think they're going to hand you? Nothing but grief. Because the other slaves told them they were descendants too. And they still went right on incapacitating them into slavery. It had no power, it had no zeal, it had no authority. So don't let those so-called people fool you, who are doing their master's bidding by further enslaving you with the terminology DOS. Who could hear such madness? And why would you want to take up with a name like that? When you want to start all over again and give yourself authority, you give yourself a name that carries the weight of authority, not something that's going to keep you in bondage. And I would like to say that when we have our council of elders, it will not be ditto or memographic after the Native Americans. It will not be consumed by using their structures. We are intelligent people. We know how to form a quorum, and we know how to come together to form Robert's Rule of Records and to establish our structure in our Articles of Incorporation. And when you put together and structure yourself and you delegate to people that are going to carry these responsibilities out, people take pride and respect in being a part of a structured, organized group. And the reason you're in here today is because you've been watching me and following me and seeing if I'm a woman of my word, because I carry within me purpose. And I carry within me the ability to structure and lay down a foundation to pass on to you. So in case I am incapacitated or removed, the movement still goes on. I do not have to be in front of you. Once you are governed and instructed to what to do, this mission could carry on without me. This mission must carry on without me. And what our other leaders have been failing to do is to put purpose in the individuals so that they all carry the purpose and they all can occupy without a leader in front of them. I am not your leader, and I will never be your leader. I will only be a facilitator to help you structure yourself so that within your capacity, each and every one of you have the ability to delegate and to carry out the mission of reestablishing and forming our new tribe and giving it a name, first of all, a name that will depict who we are, and not necessarily a name that will shame us and put us in incapacitation and damage us before we get started. Anything to do with the slave and the fact that they were submissive and docile would indicate nobody would take us serious, because they know a slave did what they were told and they feared their life, and sometimes they backslid and they gave their own brother up, and they were used as a proxy, and they were also used to go out and further endanger other slaves. So we want nothing to do with the title and term of descendants of slaves, because even the indentured servant sounds better than descendants of slaves. So what you call yourself is very important. And don't you ever forget it. There is something in a name. And when you put a decrepitating name upon yourself and one that will further mutilate you or further put you in bondage, no one will take you serious because they will see that you're a defeated foe. So drop the name. Whenever you start something new, you usually give up the old names that you were failing in anyway, and you adopt a new name so that you have the ability to start all over fresh, and you can start with a purpose in mind. When they gave us slaves and called us slaves in the first place, when we introduced ourselves or our family introduced themselves, they were not considered to take serious because they had no power, and they knew that the definition of slaves meant that you can order them around, do what you wanted with them, and take advantage of them, and they would just comply because they are carrying out the nature of a slave. So don't talk to me about no damn nature of a slave, because I'm telling you right now, the slave were given this name to put incapacitation on them, to render them helpless. And when Nat Turner rised up, he took off the slave name. And when Harriet Tubman rose up, she took off the slave name. And when Harriet Beecher Stowe stepped in to talk about integrating women, she had to come with a new name for those slave women. Those slave women no longer considered themselves slaves, and they weren't telling everybody that my pappy and my mammy were a slave. You better fear me. What do you think they did? They said, get on over there, boy. You ain't nothing but a slave, and you're no better than they are. So let's drop this nonsense about descendants of slaves. There's no glory in talking about descendants of slaves when they were defeated and killed and buried in unmarked graves. Come on now. You better talk to some of these people on the radio show, because they done lost their ever-loving mind, telling someone to walk around and introduce themselves as a DOS. Sounds like to me dead on suspicious. So we have to get this name right. And don't believe the okie doke. And when you go in these rooms, you raise your hand and set them straight and say, I'm no descendant of a slave, and I will not perpetuate the name of a slave in anything that I am about to do. I am not a defeated foe, but I am one to be reckoned with, a force to be reckoned with. So when you give yourself a title and a name, it must represent what you are, who you are, and what you're capable of doing. So if you're a defeated slave and you use the name descendants of slaves, you are not capable of doing any more than your mothers and fathers did. So drop the name. Do you get it? Drop the name. And you can tell them that I said so. I will not use descendants of slaves. It is impeccable. It is degradable. So when we find a name that's fitting for us, and that takes time. There's not just one name that you're known by. The Africans teach you to develop 3 names. Come up with 3 names. And when you develop those names, they must mean something. And it just can't be off the top of your head. Now let's get back to these Native American tribes. They're in the courtroom right now, writing us off as black people, as African Americans, and they don't want our membership in their group. Well, guess what? We don't want to be identified with the Indians because we are chief, a Bohemian chief, and not an Indian. The Indians are the ones that came over after the fact, after the thick of things, after we had already laid up some timber. They came over after us, pretending to be us, and not able to withstand slavery, and they couldn't stand up to slavery. So they had to let them go and let them run into the woods because they couldn't use them as slaves. But we were the ones that could endure. So if we were the first Aboriginal people that were here, maybe we were a little docile and allowed them to put the bags over our head and to drag us back with them. Maybe we were. But now, this is a new thing. We are now formalizing tribes, and we know what to put in a tribe, and we are aware of the fact that by virtue of us being part of nature and virtue of the fact that we have learned from slavery, we can do a lot better than what our mothers and fathers did. We're not going to let anyone capture us again or put us in fortitude or demean us or to take us. They will have to take us by force. So I don't know what you say about that, Lancer. I don't know what you say about that, Jaquil. I don't know what you say about that, Pastor Frank, but y'all better speak up and say something in these rooms today. Because we have been laying so low, but how low can we go? We need to get up and we need to understand that we're fighting to get our DNA to see if we're part natives, and we're trying to put ourselves into these Indian tribes who don't want us. And we're finding that they're going to court to make it official, to get a treaty to bar us out permanently from henceforth and forevermore. So what does that mean if you find out you're tribal? Does that mean you can walk into their treaty meeting? Does that mean that you can go to one of their powwows? Does that mean that you can come in there and say, my pappy was a slave and I is one of the descendant and I belong with you natives? When they've already officially barred you out with pen and paper in the courtroom, you have no more appeal to mandate any benefits from them. And don't even try to get benefits from them, because they are twirling with the government system themselves. But they've been long recognized as one of the people that was entitled to reparation. But we're the indigenous people, you say. Yes, we are. And that can be proven. And we're not talking about trying to prove that we were descendants of slaves. Because, see, that is still yet to be capable of being proved. You would have to pull out a lot of documentation to prove that your mammy and your pappy and your uncle and grandmother were descendant. And sometimes your names may not even be on there. But you can go to the Rose documentation of indigenous people and find color folks there. And everywhere you see color folks, that represent that you were an indigenous people to this land here. You can prove that, but you can't prove that you're no damn descendant of a slave. They don't have the documentation on some of those slave ships, and some of you will never find your mothers and your fathers and grandpappies of who were descendant. But you can go to the Census Bureau, and the freedmen's list is still there. And you can prove that you were a member of the colored people, which indicates that you were freedmen and you were part of the indigenous people. So call yourself aboriginal indigenous people and lose the descendants of slaves. I don't want to hear nobody in here walking around saying, I'm a DOS, I'm a descendant of a slave. I don't want to hear it. I don't. I'm sorry, I don't. We've overcome, and we cannot be stupid all our lives. We've got to come up with some real intelligence and realize it's okay for us to define ourselves. It's okay for us to name ourselves. And it's okay for us to practice kujichajilia, the ability to name ourselves, define for ourselves, and to determine who our enemies will be. See, that's been the problem. Everybody's been defining us. Hey, they're niggers. Let's call them niggers. Hey, they're color folks. Let's call them colored. Hey, let's call them African. No, they're African American. What have they not called us? And that we've benefited from or grown up and lived by the virtues and the tenements. We can live by the virtues and the tenements of an indigenous person, meaning that you come with the land and that you were plotted here on this land, and the land meant nothing unless you were here. It makes you the first original man. And any fool that say that the so-called Indian was the indigenous man, we didn't come from them. They came from us. And we are mankind, not a kind of man like they are. The Indians are a kind of man and woman. But we are the indigenous people, and it means something. And it does you right to adapt that terminology and to use appropriate terminology and not as if you were not in the thick of things. You were in the thick of things. You were here at the beginning of foundation. They don't know a time when you weren't here. You were always here. Well, when did the African come here? I don't know a time when they weren't here. They were always here. So when you declare yourself as an indigenous anything, that means you were first. You were the beginning, not the end, not an afterthought, but you were the beginning. And when we get these people together on the airways who are teaching foul and serve them notice and say we will not call ourselves DOS, and let them know you are required to do some additional studies. And when you don't do your due diligence, you don't do us any good by formalizing names that don't fit us. You further indict the black man and woman, and we're not going to allow it just so that you can say you coined the name DOS. And whoever don't like it, they can come talk with me. Tell them to come talk with Mother. Omi wants to speak to them. Because if they don't know their history, I can help school them. But we got to get ourselves together. We're forming a new tribe. And we're starting with the Council of the Elders. We need elders on the council to speak on behalf of cases and to have our own hearings and our own proceedings, so we have our own jury and trials. So we need a council of elders, and we need those seniors who have skills and backgrounds to be able to serve us on the council of elders. I want you to be thinking about who in this room or who on this channel would like to be one of the council of elders. And I also told you about the courtrooms that are filled with our babies and our children, and we are working on helping the babies from the bench and the youngest child. That organization needs to be filled with social workers and with case managers and with lawyers, DAs. That organization needs to be filled like yesterday, and it needs to be put together so that every time a case in the juvenile court is read, that somebody from that council is there ready to report on what's going on. We've got to penetrate the judicial system. We got to get in there and be a part of it. We got to show and prove, and we got to let them know that don't nothing go down except it goes through the council. And anybody in their right mind who is an organizer knows you must penetrate just like the Jews do. They penetrate the media. They penetrate everything. And they're there, but yet they're small in numbers. What is wrong with us black people? We are great in numbers. All we need to do is have a facilitator to help us organize. We don't need a leader. And I'm not talking about being anybody's leader. I'm talking about you helping to stand up here with me and these preachers like you, Pastor Frank, and stop with all these sermons and come in and say, let's organize. Turn it around. Because when you have been strengthened, you go back and turn it around. Doesn't it say that, Pastor Frank? That when you've been strengthened, you go back and turn it around. Turn the brethren around and bring the brethren back. So if we start with all these sermons and we start talking about organization of our tribe and of our nation, you could do some good in the community. And I'm not frowning upon you because you're a pastor. I'm telling you, get your structure right, because people need help now. They don't need another sermon. Paul and Peter and Paul I know, but who the hell are you? You need to show your people that they can do something now. Those stories were meant for a certain time. We don't need another allegory story. We need to have structure in developing our own tribes so that people won't bar us out in courtrooms. Now, I know I'm talking to somebody. I'm saying something today. And I'm frustrated because so many black men are asking for the way. I'm giving you the way. This is the way. And if you don't do anything else, establish your indigenous way. And you can look back over the records to see what your ancestors did and how they survived and how for so many eons that the ancient people survived. And we can establish our way. We don't have to go astray. We don't have to be a lost tribe. And we don't have to be a tribe that's put out and that's negated in courtroom. We can be a tribe that's a force to be reckoned with. How about that, Lancer? Is anybody with me on this? If anybody has a problem with formalizing a council of elders, then step up and step out and say something. Because I don't want you in here if you ain't for what I'm saying. And I'm a hard taskmaster, but you better believe I'm giving 101. I don't come on these airways to play with y'all. I told y'all it's time to go to work. It's time to put up or shut up. It's time to step up here and develop your tribe and stop letting ignorant people go on these airways to further indict you as a damn slave. And they have the audacity to look you in the face and tell you, we gonna be a DOS. Well, what's that? What's that? That's a descendant of slave. What am I gonna do with descendant of slave? Is it gonna disempower me? Do I have any authority? No, you don't. And you better not let them put it on you. Because if you do, and you start using the words, you will further indict yourself. And I'm looking for them to come up with a plan. I spend my time going in their room to listen to them. But there's no plans. They seem like they're agents working for the man to further indict us and to keep us down. And how else are we going to make it over the grain house except for we formalize our own tribes and our name and we become tribal membership so that we work on our own problem. So when the court cases go in, we have nobody to blame but ourselves. We formalize our own counsel on these shootings and we formalize a decision and we bring it to the courtroom and tell them what we've decided. And the council of elders will gain respect and the council of elders will be consulted and the council of elders will get in the courtroom and on the juries. Now tell me it ain't so. When you doing something good out here and they find out the black people are doing it better than them, they come and steal your ways or they come and infiltrate your ways or they invite you in. They better count us in or count us out. Because there's too much happening and we just shaking our heads and yet we said we got these degrees. Then what are they good for if you cannot formalize yourself, to structure yourself, to become intelligent enough to defeat them at their own game? And enough is enough. We find ourselves at the 1300 hour, can't formalize a nation, can't get with the other Indian, can't get what they got, then get our own and formalize our own. Accept yourself. And when you accept yourself, you can be yourself, but you can't accept no damn slave. So don't think because you pick up that term, that's going to make you somebody. Just like when we learned about in Chicago through the Rainbow organization, the first thing we learned was I am somebody. I am somebody. And when a man takes up the statement that he is somebody, guess what? You internalize that and you become somebody and you act like somebody. But you must first know who you are. And you can't be no Negro drifting around here from some slave plantation talking about your mama and your pappy was descendants of slave. What in the hell does that mean? Does that mean they carried any weight? No. Then get you another name and it better be powerful enough to determine and speak on who you are. Whose you are and who you are. And I'm telling you, don't just take up with any name. And that should settle that situation. And if the people got a problem with me and telling you not to use DOS, then tell them to come and talk to mother. Because I don't have nothing but time on my hand. And I want you to know that we have got to start like yesterday. Because children in the courtroom are perishing. And baby can't wait. We need a council of elders to help those infants and toddlers to get them out of the system as quickly as possible. And not only do we need a council of elders to work with the court system for the children, then we need a council of elders to drift into the juries and into the courtrooms and come in 100 strong and to show up every time there's a court case for any young man that may have been shot in the street. Then as they see us penetrating, they will realize these people are serious. We're going to have to count them in, but because we sure can't count them out. So I want you to understand that there is something in the name, but we must formalize our tribes. We understand that we all don't speak the same language. Let the ministers go together in their group and formalize, because they have their own issues to deal with. Then let the teachers go together in their own group. The firemen, the social workers, the nurses, meet up and talk. You don't need a leader. Just meet up and talk about the issues and formalize the Robert Rule of Records and set up your own entity where you are structured enough to report back to the overall group. Structure and organization is what causes us to lose because we're not organized and structured. But that shouldn't happen again this time, because we have talented people that are on the watch now that know how to strategize and to structure and to plan. And if a pastor keep giving you rhetoric about Paul, Peter, and John, you tell them that that's a Paulinian ministry anyway. And Jesus didn't call Paul to lead and to rule. He called Peter, but they fooled him. And they put Paul language and literature throughout the Bible, and you think you are perpetuating the Jesus literature. You are not perpetuating the Jesus literature, and whoever told you is a liar. You are perpetuating the Paulinians ministry. And Paul knows it. He even laughed about it in the scriptures and said that you would believe it. But yet Peter was not formalized as the rock. They made you think that this was Peter's foundation, but Peter wasn't formalized as a rock. Why don't you correct those Bibles and biblicals and stop teaching heresy to people? I've been in ministerial school too, but I refuse to teach heresy to any people because I'll be held accountable, and so are you. I'm going to shame you. I'm sorry. I'm going to shame you, Pastor Frank. I'm going to shame you because we know better. And when we know better, we can do better. We don't have time. This is 1300 hour, and we're still teaching this garbage from the book that has been recreated at the Nicene Council. And we know we're not teaching Jesus' teaching. We're going from Paulinian and Mark, and you know good and well that all of that scripture was changed, it was tampered with, and it was adapted. So it's not the authentic word of God. And whoever says it is a liar. Because I studied for 2 years in the theology school, and I know what I'm talking about. That's why I won't breathe a word of it, because it's a mutilated book. It's a tampered book, and it's been discombobulated. And yet we have brothers that are failing, going into the prison system and need help with a little structure. And we're wasting their time with these discombobulated stories out of the Bible. We don't have time anymore. We don't have time anymore. Time is up.